There are two eternal questions in Russia, what to do and who's to blame, and both coincidentally are book titles. So let's look at Who's to Blame by Herzen today. Alexander Herzen was born 6th of April 1812 in Moscow. He was the illegitimate son of a rich landowner Yakovlev who couldn't give him his last name, so he came up with a different one. He called him Herzen, derived from German Herz, child of his heart. Herzen was born right before the siege of the city by Napoleon, so the family got stuck in the occupied city. Yakovlev, who was close to the Tsar, managed to get an audience with Napoleon and agreed to deliver a letter to Alexander I, and thus was allowed to leave the city. This meeting, however, all but ended Yakovlev's career as it raised suspicions as to his allegiances. For Herzen, this incident, however, and the very fact that he was born right in the middle of the Napoleonic Wars and in burning Moscow, was the sign that he was destined for great things. Herzen's education before university was inconsistent. French and German governors came and went, but they managed to give him a mastery of foreign languages, a love for Schiller and Goethe, and a certain fascination with Great French Revolution. An event that became foundational for Herzen was the Decembrist Revolt. The 13-year-old Herzen was horrified and devastated by the harsh punishment delivered to the failed revolutionaries. That led to the famous oath that he and his friend Ogarev took during a walk on Sparrow Hills in Moscow. There they promised each other eternal friendship and to dedicate their lives to fighting for freedom in Russia. And really, what 13-year-old wouldn't? At university, Herzen's revolutionary spirit only grew. A circle of like-minded people formed around him. They were young, they were rowdy, but they were basically harmless. They were studying philosophy and history and met to discuss it. That, however, only led to a rather expected outcome: prison and exile. 1834, a number of students met up, they'd gone drinking, they did this and that, but the problem was that amongst them was a police informant. They were all arrested for singing paskinets that were meant to insult the emperor. Herzen and Ogarev were both arrested as well, even though they were not at that party and barely even knew the people who were there. The charge was later amended for them to associating with people who were singing paskinets that were meant to insult the emperor. So that tells us two things. One, it was really easy to insult Nikolai I, and two, the police just needed an excuse. After a brief stint in prison as he awaited his sentence, 1835, Herzen was sent to Perm, then Verki, and 1837 was transferred to Vladimir. During this exile, Herzen got close to his future wife Natalia, his cousin, also an illegitimate child, and they used to send each other these long letters full of love and passion. And 1837, Herzen even snuck out of Vladimir, went to Moscow, took Natalia with him, and they got married that year. Herzen's exile first ended 1840 and he returned to St. Petersburg and became part of the group called the Westernizers, a group of individuals who firmly believed that Russia needed to follow the example set by the Western countries, the European countries, in order to become prosperous. They kind of are opposed to these Slavophile group, which firmly believed in Russia's own and unique way in modernizing itself and becoming prosperous, basically. Then there was the second exile, the reason for it even more flimsy than the first one. There was a political assassination in St. Petersburg and the whole town was talking about it, and Herzen wrote about it to his father, and that was construed as support for the assassination. And thus the Russian autocracy was suffocating Herzen, and 1847 he left for Europe, never to return. Herzen at the time was a huge proponent of the Republic, and thus the revolution of 1848 in France that he was present for in Paris was a dream come true. That dream was quickly crushed, though, by the June's Day uprising. Herzen was horrified and devastated by the bloody suppression of the revolt and the aftermath of it, so his sympathies afterwards moved more towards socialism. The state of Europe at the time led Herzen to a particular set of beliefs that Europe was dying and it was up to Russia now to fulfill the ideals of socialism. After a series of tragic events in his personal life, his wife's affair with the German pirate Herwig, the loss of his mother and his son in a maritime accident offshore Italy after his wife's passing, along with their newborn child, Herzen dedicated himself to work and he moved to London. He created the Free Russian Press printing company that published all of the forbidden literature, and he also published a magazine called Kolokol. It was probably the first truly political magazine and revolutionary one at that. Kolokol translates as the bell, and there is a saying that Herzen woke Russia up with the ringing of his bell. In his personal life, he also started an affair, I guess, with his best friend Agarov's wife, Natalia. They had a couple of children together that were Agarov's in name, but in true Herzen's. Somehow Herzen and Agarov managed to remain friends. I don't know. These 19th century writers, they're all messy. 1865, due to the pressure that the British government was receiving from the Russian government, Herzen moved along with his printing company to Switzerland. Herzen passed away January 1870 in Paris from pneumonia. In literature, Herzen is most known for his autobiography, My Past and Thoughts, that not only tells his own story, but also describes the society and the political landscape of Russia and Europe during mid-19th century. In fiction, his most famous work is the novel Who's to Blame. He's also written a number of short stories. Shall we recap Who's to Blame then? Who's to Blame opens with the arrival of a new tutor called Dmitry Krutsifersky to an estate of ex-general Negrov. Negrov family consists of him, his wife Glafira, their children, and also Negrov's illegitimate daughter called Luba. Krutsifersky falls madly in love with Luba, and she also has feelings for him, so he writes her a passionate letter. A governess in the house offers Krutsifersky to arrange a meeting between him and his beloved, and when he goes to an arranged spot on the balcony and in a rush of feeling kisses her, he started to see that it's Glafira who came to see him, Negrov's wife. He flees in horror. Glafira reads the letter and is hurt and betrayed, as she was also lusting after the new tutor. She shows the letter to her husband, and he immediately pushes for Krutsifersky to marry Luba, happy to get rid of the girl. A few years later, a new man arrives in the provincial town of X, that's Vladimir Beltov. Beltov, a rich landowner, he was raised by his mother, who used to be a peasant before she married Beltov's father, and she also hired a tutor, a French-Swiss tutor called Joseph, who provided a rather eclectic education to Beltov. After uni, Beltov attempted various careers as a civil servant, as a doctor, as a painter, but nothing suited him. Now he's returned from his travels in Europe to participate in local elections, his newest fancy. Obviously, he does not win any elections. He is behaving completely wrong according to the local bureaucracy. But through a Dr. Krupov, he gets introduced to the Krutsifersky couple, who have been married for a little while now and have a young son. Krupov describes their union as idyllic. Dmitry worships his wife and she also loves him, and they welcome the newcomer Beltov in and they become friends. However, soon enough, feelings develop between Beltov and Luba. He even kisses her in secret. Luba is so torn between her new love for Beltov and her affection towards her husband that it makes her physically ill. Krutsifersky also notices the feelings between them and starts drinking heavily. Beltov, at the insistence of Dr. Krupov, leaves town, never to return, and Luba is ill and Krutsifersky is drinking. And that's how the novel ends. Who's to Blame was an interesting read. At first it reminded me a little bit of the novels that I don't particularly enjoy, something like Oblomov, where the plot is thin and a lot of time is dedicated to the depictions of people and nature. But I quickly was overtaken by his prose, and I want to start with this. We'll talk themes in a second. But what really kind of kept me going was the language and how he works with text. Belinsky compared Herzen to Voltaire, but I instantly also recognized the similarities that he carries with my beloved Gogol. They flow in the same way, their satire quite similar. It's all very subtle but so poignant. Structurally, the novel is composed as a quilt of character biographies. One flows from another, and through them we are presented with typical portraits of the epoch. I would describe it as a painting, or paintings even, first of the lazy and idle old nobility in Negrov and Negrov's family, the poor station and discrimination of illegitimate children and the peasant girls around them, then a portrait of our noble outcast in Beltov, various sketches of the bureaucracy of X-Town, and then the portrait of the idyllic Krucifersky couple and its downfall. The author interrupts the narrative to paint these sketches of seemingly inconsequential characters, but it simply adds to the tapestry that is Herzen's Russia. Stylistically, Herzen tells the story through these character biographies. He even apologizes to his reader, as it's likely not the most thrilling narrative choice he could have made, but there is very little plot that is not packed into these biographies, but I and Herzen would advise not skipping anything if you really want to get the book. And also, sometimes when Herzen really needs to get into his character's head, he provides extracts from the diaries. Also, a background detail to keep in mind is that Herzen likely wrote the novel with an audience in mind. He addressed it to his generation, the noblemen around him. Through the book, he tried to process the themes and issues that plagued him, but also to bring it to the attention of people around him. That does not mean that we cannot learn anything from the book. It's just that some details and themes are tailor-made for the early 19th century Russia. And what themes are those? Well, in a broader sense, it's the state of Russia and its people. Smaller, the fate of people like Beltov, who one can imagine Herzen believed himself to be. And even smaller, the family drama. Herzen has no love lost for the Russia that he ended up leaving, the Nikolai I Russia, reactionary, regressive, lazy and empty. That Russia is presented in the image of Negrov, the retired general who relies on his serfs, i.e. slaves, for a living. It is best seen in the depiction of his daily routine, sleeping, eating, scolding the servants, running after peasant girls, and creating the air of activity that is simply not there. Same goes for his wife, also sleeping, eating, gossiping with the governess, buying English-made books never to read them, and running after the new tutor because he's simply the first young man she's seen in a while. And that's the life of the rich landowners, empty and frankly vile. There is the lot of bureaucracy of X-Town, narrow-minded, focused on menial tasks and following protocols that mean nothing. Herzen at the time of writing was still enamored with the idea of Europe and the Republic, and that's why Beltov returns to Russia having seen workers going to vote, and that's why he returns to participate in the local elections, as he, like Herzen, believes that to be the future. And the society rejects Beltov. Nobody votes for him in those elections, and Herzen writes about it in passing as if it's the most obvious thing to have happened, that he doesn't even really need to mention it. And then there are the classes of the oppressed, the commoners like the Krucifersky family, the peasants, and women. The first just try to get by. Dmitry Krucifersky only gets a chance in life, well, by chance. He even laments the fact that his entire life is ruled by chance, by destiny, and he has no control over it. The problems of the peasant men are not raised in this novel in any meaningful way, but women, Herzen has things to say about women. The feminism angle can be subtle, it's all in the satire. For example, when Beltov arrives in town, he behaves inappropriately because he talks to women as if they were real people. But even beyond the subtle digs, the novel is full of stories of women, but those stories are never good. Herzen talks of peasant women in hold of their landowners and noblemen, whether it's their illegitimate daughters, their mistresses, or simply women they desire. It is our female lead, Lyuba, who's first ping-ponged between servants' quarters and the master's quarters, and then still has to suffer the dubiousness of her situation as the illegitimate daughter taken in by the generous general's wife. It's her peasant mother who, for a good portion of the story, does not even get a name. She's simply called Blue Eyes. And then she's given to Negrov's steward, well, for all intents and purposes, as a reward to him and as a way to get rid of her when Negrov himself decides to get married. It's Beltov's peasant mother who tried to make an honest living as a governess, but first is forced to flee the unwanted advances of a nobleman, and rumors still follow her and ruin her life. And really, even though the things work out for her somewhat, the nobleman who made those unwanted advances marries her to save her, and it's still kind of gross. Even noble women are miserable. It's Negrov's wife and her complicated relationship with her husband, with Luba, with her children, her failed attempt at the affair with the new tutor. It's all these old scheming women who spread rumors with a malicious intent and who are kind of ruthless in trying to get what they want. Herzen himself believed that women were meant for more than a life of a wife and a mother, the only two options available to women of his circle at the time period. So he satirizes this position of women in his novel in some places, like the Negrov's proposal and an attempt to marry Beltov off to Marshall's daughter, for example. And then there is also Luba's story, a woman who married a man she believed she loved, but who couldn't match her in her intelligence, ambitions, and capacity for feelings. I wouldn't say that Herzen paints an emancipated woman here, or even a strong one by the 21st century standards at least, but her strength lies in the way that she sees the world, how she's open to it. It's the emotional intelligence. She's constantly interrogating her own feelings and trying to understand the world around her and her place in it. And that's why she cannot hide her feelings for Beltov, a man who is her match, or at least a better match than her husband. They understand each other, they click, and they fall in love. But because the only role that a woman can fulfill in the society is a wife and a mother, Luba has no way out of the sticky situation that she found herself in, and she gets physically ill because of it. And even Beltov's departure cannot solve the problem, because while he instigated the whole situation, he is not the root cause of the problem in that marriage. Who is Beltov then? Beltov is what we call the superfluous man type. The term may come from the Diary of the Superfluous Man by Turgenev, published 1850, but Beltov is basically the picture-perfect example of the type. And the type is young, brilliant, wealthy, but that type of man does not fit into his own society. He is depicted as to be in conflict with it, but while he is seemingly above them, he's not trying to inflict change on the society, mostly occupying himself with destructive tendencies and occupations such as alcohol, gambling, duels, and women. And while the term itself was applied to characters like Onegin, Pechorin, or Beltov retroactively, and they were not written with a type in mind, they are the representation of the problem that existed in the society at the time. Russia at the time bred these extraordinary men, but did not allow them space to fully realize themselves, leading them towards indolence and self-destruction. That's what we saw in Onegin, Pechorin, and even Beltov, them wandering around life trying to find meaning in something but being unable to. But Herzen goes further. He attempts to find the root of the issue. He is asking who's to blame that these men exist. And for him, that's the education that Beltov received that has not prepared him for the society that he's going to be living in, thus basically making him an outcast by design. In the novel, Beltov's tutor Joseph took the assignment of teaching this young boy quite seriously. He studied all the pedagogical books that he could find, even Jean-Jacques Rousseau and such. But there was one thing that he missed that, according to Herzen, was the most important one. The education's purpose is to help the young mind adapt to the society that he's going to be living in, including the particularities of his culture, nationality, and class. And that's the one thing that Joseph missed in Beltov's education. He gave him all of these theoretical or even practical ideas that were of no use in Nikolai I's Russia. But also, on top of that, the value system that Beltov ended up with, thanks to Joseph, was self-contradictory. The ideas of Age of Enlightenment, where a great man stands above all the old societal norms and prejudice, were coming into conflict with the ideas of Great French Revolution that called for asceticism, heroism, and self-sacrifice. This type of heroism was found in ancient Rome. Weakness demeans the Roman. Roman needs to reject all of these worldly possessions, the riches and fortunes and such. That's the Roman stoicism. Joseph himself tried to follow the same rules. For example, Beltov's mother was willing to pay him 4,000 rubles, but he only accepted 1,200 because that's all he needed and saving is vulgar. But also, as if all of this wasn't enough, Joseph taught Beltov about sentimentalism of Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Goethe's Werther. A man needs to be sensible, tender, dreamy, otherwise he's more akin to a machine rather than a man. So as you can see, the rational man of the Age of Enlightenment has very little to do with this type of sentimentality, and neither concept merges with a Roman hero. And then you plop this walking contradiction into a provincial town of the Nikolai I's 19th century Russia. Obviously, it did not agree with him. Beltov makes multiple attempts at integrating himself, none successful. His colleagues make fun of him for writing pompous papers when they really need to be curt, short, and to the fact. Then Beltov is disappointed by the doctors who are focused on the daily tasks rather than finding the new cures or moving the science forward. He is full of this grandeur, this pathos that has no place here and actually hinders everything and everyone. And that's another thing that Herzen brings to our attention, that this exhaled escapism does not allow Beltov to be useful to the society around him. All his brains, all of his intelligence, his ideas, they are all nothing if he cannot apply them with any useful skill. If he cannot write a simple paper without falling into pathetics, what's the point of it all? And Herzen fully understands what he's writing about, or rather who, and that's him and his peers. He believed that the education that he and his peers have received, it bred all of these superfluous men in literature, but also in real life. It's Herzen, his friends and peers, and before them, Decembrists. And while Nikolai I's Russia was to blame, they were as well, as they likely had the tools to change it, but were unable to. And just like his character Beltov, Herzen ended up leaving Russia in pursuit of something better. And so Beltov follows in the tradition of Onegin, Pechorin, and Chadsky. Researchers imply that he's a little bit more noble. He does not kill his best friend out of boredom, for example, but still his presence is destructive. That's the accusation that Dr. Krupov throws at him, that he's destroyed the happiness of Krucefersky and consequently Krupov's own happiness as well, as he was receiving it by being in presence of Krucefersky's happiness and idyll. And it actually makes me sad as well how Herzen completely annihilates the Krucefersky couple. I was rather rooting for them. They exuded this calm happiness that I crave myself. So when Krupov was describing them as an exception to all the married couples who are unhappy, I also wanted them to be an exception. And for all of this to be ruined by a presence of a different man, well, not my favorite trope. Herzen poses the question of who's to blame right when the love triangle reaches its pinnacle. So it's very easy to treat it simply as a way for us to understand what had transpired between these three. The reality is that the love story is just a microcosm of all the problems and issues that Herzen tried to bring to our attention, the ones that we just talked about, the political landscape, the society and its vices, feminism even. Herzen does not give us an answer to the question, he encourages us to seek the answer ourselves, and that's why I'm also tempted to leave it open-ended. Because the reality is that nobody is to blame and everyone is at the same time. The argument can be made that Herzen puts a little bit more blame on Dmitri because the story has markings of Herzen's own story in it. His marriage to his first wife Natalia had its moments, but it also had a lot of problems. Natalia believed in the all-consuming kind of out-of-this-world love, and she saw her life's purpose in this love and marriage, while Herzen found it suffocating, and he firmly believed in what we would call feminism now, that in order for a marriage to be successful, both parties need to have outside interests and occupations. He encouraged Natalia to be more emancipated. He gave her Georges Sand to read. He encouraged her to find something to occupy herself with, to form a literary circle, for example. But Natalia nodded, but her heart was not in it. And in the end, what happened was that she understood that while this great love might not have worked with Herzen, it might work with somebody else, and so she fell in love with that poet Herwig. Beltov takes on quite a few of Herzen's own traits, but weirdly it's Dmitri who takes on Natalia's role in this story. He is the one all consumed by his love for Luba, and it's enough for him. He has no other interest or ambition beyond this dedication to his wife. And in Herzen's mind, that's a fault. He saw the success of a couple with both of them being occupied with something, them being intellectual equals, partners. And that's why Luba has a little bit more agency in the story. We're privy to her innermost thoughts through her diary entries. She loves both of these men just differently, maybe with similar intensity even. But we also see what attracted her to Beltov. It's his mind, his ideas, his spirit even. All of these things that Krucifersky, if not fully lacks, but at least has less of. And also, kidding but not kidding, polyamory could have solved the problem in this novel right away. Because all of the three love each other in one form or the other, and it's only the societal norms that keeping their happiness away from them. So, yeah. And it also is kind of weird that later in life, Herzen himself repeated the situation in real life when he took his best friend Agarov's wife, and Agarov started drinking heavily like Krucifersky did. So, but basically Herzen and Agarov somehow managed to remain friends. I don't know. Should you read Who's to Blame? I don't know. I personally enjoyed it, but I feel like an unprepared reader might find it boring. And by unprepared, I mean somebody who has not read 20 plus books of the early 19th century Russian literature. Because it is very much on brand with what you would expect from the novel of the time period, but not in any remarkable way. One thing that it is going for it is that it's relatively short. It's something like... That's this. So maybe you can check it out. It has beautiful prose, but the plot is not remarkable, so it's up to you whether or not you want to check it out.